Welcome to Beat Diabetes, where we talk about, well, you guessed it, beating diabetes. On today's program, we'll look at, among other things, why it is that some people seem to lower that blood sugar lightning fast once they cut those carbs, and others, well, they take a while longer. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description. Okay, here is another comment. This was left under my spaghetti comparisons video, and they ask, well, what about the actual sauce? Even authentic marinara with olive oil can still have high carbs and or sugar. Well, I guess high carbs is in the eye of the beholder. You know, I learned to count carbs almost as an afterthought. For much of my early days, I didn't worry much about what carbs food had. And I just tested myself with Mike, the blood sugar meter, and if he said that meal was too high and was spiking my blood sugar too high, I wouldn't eat it. Of course, I began to eventually recognize that the foods and the meals that spiked it were the high-carb meals, and I could start looking at carbs on labels and get a better idea of how they would spike it. But in many cases, I've always been sort of I call it a pragmatic dieter, in the sense that I'm not one that says I'll never eat a carb again, or because they've added a little bit of sugar or sweetener to some food product, but it's so small that it won't spike my blood sugar, that doesn't bother me. I can live with that. And one example of that is peanut butter. Now, peanut butter has added sugar unless you buy the natural kind. And so, but I've eaten peanut butter, just the ordinary plain old Kroger peanut butter, Walmart peanut butter, whatever, and it's got a few grams of sugar added, but not enough to really bother Mike. And so, because of that, it frees me to eat things others probably would not. So, to me, you know, this person is talking about spaghetti sauce and saying, well, yeah, but those sauces have carbs. They do. And that doesn't bother me much as long as my total glucose spike doesn't get too out of hand. In other words, even if I have a spaghetti sauce that has a few carbs, if my peak after the meal stays under 130, then I'm good. And I'm not going to go around crying and moaning and feeling guilty because, yeah, my spaghetti sauce technically had a few added sugars to it. It just wasn't enough. There's a saying, I think Dr. Robert Lustig or Ludwig, I get those two mixed up. One of the Roberts made popular in one of his YouTube talks, the dose is the poison. And there's a lot of things we could take in moderation, in small amounts, and get by with. I forgive me for saying moderation. I don't really like the word moderation because that sort of implies just kind of take it easy. You got to do more than that. But there are a lot of things we can take in small amounts. And peanut butter would be an example. Spaghetti sauce would be another example. Picante sauce is going to have a few carbs, but I can put that freely on some eggs, and it doesn't show up on my blood sugar meter much. Maybe it went a few points higher than it otherwise would. But part of the sustainability thing for me is being able to eat as many types of foods as possible that can stay under my target blood sugar marks and satisfy me. So for me to have some picante sauce or spaghetti sauce, when I make a pizza, I will use spaghetti sauce frequently. And yeah, I know I'm getting a few carbs, and it doesn't show up on the meter. It doesn't show up as a bad thing. So Now, if I was in phase A, where I was just coming off of a 12A1C, I'd probably get a lot more radical than I do. I know now what I can get by with and what I can't. But if I was in phase A and I just came home from the doctor, he told me I had a 12A1C or 11A1C or a 10A1C or a 14A1C, I'd get really serious and really get that thing down. And from there, maybe experiment a little, let up on the gas a little bit, and learn what works and what doesn't, just as long as you keep your targets for your blood sugar peaks below a certain level. For me, 140 is the absolute max, but under normal conditions and normal situations, I want it under 130. You'll have to set that for yourself. Here's an individual who says, I cut out tons of carbs. My A1C has remained 5.4 for over a year. Before that, it was 5.6. So there's a little frustration here. He says, my fasting glucose is in the low 90s, which is good. He says, I don't understand why my A1C doesn't go down. I know comparison is not good, but I hear of low-carb people with numbers lower than me. In the last year, I've noticed my sleep isn't as deep. All right. Well, he's right. You cannot compare yourself with somebody else. There's just too many factors. It's just way too complicated. Your life, your body, your pancreas, your liver, compared to somebody else's, there's no way anybody can really do that. I will say this based on the diabetics I've interacted with. The people who've had the most dramatic drops in glucose levels, and I mean the ones you hear about in 3 months, they go from a 12 to a 5.5, just dramatic, crazy drops in glucose levels. The people who've done that typically have one of about 3 different factors going on in their life, and sometimes they'll have all 3. Number one, they're overweight, and then they lose a lot of weight, and that can make a huge difference. When I hear of someone who's gone from a 12 down to a 5 in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, I'd almost bet they started out really overweight and they lost quite a few pounds. That would be number one. Number two, people who see dramatic drops in their glucose levels, their A1C levels in just a short time, 3 months, 4 months, they usually are relatively young. Now, notice the word relatively. I'm talking 30s, 40s, and 50s. People that are older in their 70s and 80s, typically it'll take a little longer. That's been my opinion based on people that I've talked with. So often they are overweight and they lose quite a bit of weight, and then they're relatively young, 30s, 40s, 50s. Third, they start out with really high glucose levels, and it just it's a lot easier. This guy said, well, I was at 5.6 and I've just dropped all the carbs from my diet, and after all this time, I'm at 5.4. I don't seem to have gained that much. I think he was probably hoping to be in the 4s, and he's a little frustrated that he's not there yet. But it's a lot easier to see a major drop of glucose if you start out really high than if you start out in the 5s anyway. So if you're slim and your numbers aren't really that bad in the first place, 5.5, 5.6, whatever, it may take you a lot longer than someone who starts out heavy. The important thing is that you set yourself a goal of where you want to be and then just start moving that direction as quickly as you reasonably can. Don't have to go on some crash course. You don't want to harm yourself by being too quick to change your diet. Sometimes you can ease into it over a period of weeks, but just start moving in the right direction.